tragic death of David Wilcock adds to a growing list of dead or missing scientists. My take on his bizarre death and personal recollections of a brilliant mind. On Tuesday afternoon, I heard the terrible news that David Wilcock had died under very bizarre circumstances on Monday, April 20. The local sheriff's office released a report that many will find hard to believe. Apparently, David contacted the sheriff's office and asked for help. Minutes after they showed up, he shot himself, according to the official report. David had long reported cyberstalkers launching vicious personal attacks against him. David's work in promoting breakthrough aerospace technologies such as anti-gravity put him on the front line of UFO researchers trying to revolutionize our planet. Consequently, David was a big target for covert efforts to discredit him or influence him to hurt himself in some way. Psychotronic technologies such as voice-to-skull do exist and have been used to influence individuals to engage in self-destructive behavior. It's very likely that David was targeted by such covert weapons over an extended period of time, which ultimately led to him behaving so contrary to everything he taught and believed. David therefore becomes the 12th scientist linked to UFO research who has died or is missing under mysterious circumstances. I first met David in 2008 after he agreed to speak at the Earth Transformation Conference on the Big Island of Hawaii that was organised by my wife, Angelica, Wycliffe and I. David had only recently decided to start public speaking again, and we were delighted that he chose our conference as the venue for his return. He arrived with his new girlfriend and he looked very happy. Strangely, we didn't get to see them much at the conference, but years later he confided that they chose to stay in their oceanfront hotel room, enjoying the great views and getting to know each other better, if you know what I mean. David did a presentation and a workshop that awed the audience with his unique combination of humour and profound insights. Later, in 2011, I read his first book, The Sourcefield Investigations, and honestly thought David deserved a PhD for his penetrating insights and scholarship. I got to work more closely with David in 2015 after the public emergence of Corey Goode. David and I collaborated in spreading Corey's remarkable secret space program story, and we met again at Gaia TV and several UFO disclosure events that were organised by Corey and his team. David was always a wealth of information and very popular with the audience who loved his zany humour and deep truths he shared. After Corey and I parted ways in 2021, I lost touch with David, but I would occasionally watch one of his live streams where he continued to share his wealth of information and humour. I was always impressed by David's generous spirit in sharing hours of live streams for free. In honour of David, I'm happy to announce that we were able to recover an old DVD recording of part 1 of his Hawaii workshop presentation. We are trying to find a working copy of part 2 and will release that also if possible. Please enjoy and see David at his stunning, brilliant best in 2008.
You are listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Attended that banquet meeting or would like to learn more of the background of what you're about to participate in, then I would recommend that you get that keynote presentation from Saturday night. I don't want to take up too much time because we have 3 hours for David, and I want to really give all that time to him. Very briefly, David is known as someone with an astounding record in prophecy, readings, psychic evaluations, has written books, has worked on a film which is in production at the moment. He is known most widely as being the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce in his co-authored book with Winfrey, and he talked on Saturday night about the 2012 Enigma, detailing exactly how complex that phenomenon is and what the solution is, and today he's going to go over how we can prepare for 2012. So with that, I'm thrilled to introduce David Wilcock.
Well, you notice let's see if we can, I'm noticing feedback. Let's see if we can, test. All right, so, yeah, you might notice I got a little too much sun. We went over to this organic farm on the other side of the island, and I just had what appeared to be a normal day in the water, and then I come back and my face is like, you know, burnt like a tomato. So anyway, I just like to start out by finding out, get a little orientation for myself. How many of you did not see the talk at the banquet? Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Cool. So for those of you who did not see that, you are going to get an overview of some of the aspects of it. Again, I have worked up another PowerPoint presentation which will allow us to get to the heart of these issues we're talking about. So in this case, what I'm going to do is just kind of crash right into the PowerPoint here. Last time I did a big intro. We are actually moving through a galactic change. It appears that in the grandest sense of things, our galaxy is a sentient organism. One of the things that differentiates today's talk from the one that I gave the other day is we're going to go into a lot of detail showing you how the basic energy of the universe is conscious. And I want to show you experiments that you may not have ever seen before that will actually demonstrate consciousness as an intrinsic energy field. And I believe this is such powerful information that with it you will come out of this room changed. Just knowing that aspect of the science alone will fundamentally change how you see yourself and how you live your life in very basic ways. One of the things that we know, for example, is that plants have a basic affinity with us, so that when we're having signs of stress or signs of dis-ease in ourselves, the plants are having shock reactions that you can measure in their electrical activity. And I remember one time when I was in Kentucky and I was talking to a little girl as a result of her mother being my new landlord, and I was telling her this story, and she ran out into the grass and started rolling in the grass saying, "You can hear me, you can hear me." And it just really touched my heart to see that. So we're dealing in a matrix, as some people call it, a consensus reality that tells us that you're born and you have this life and then you're going to die. And death is something you don't know what's going to happen to you. You don't know where you're going. You don't even know if you're going to keep on existing or if it's just going to be over. 2012 is fundamentally a question that raises all these threats of death because there is the scent of death on the earth for many people now. I had the benefit of taking psychedelic drugs, and that tore the walls down so that I was able to see very directly the signs of a sick world. Back in the 90s, in the late 80s, before it really was as prominent as it is now, I was seeing how we were destroying this planet and its inhabitants. It's becoming much more glaring now. Anybody at this point that's questioning global warming or climate change is looking like an idiot. It's obvious that there are changes happening on the planet that could potentially impact our lives in a negative way, up to and including our physical demise. Now, the question is, if you believe in a higher power, if you believe in God, do you also believe that this intelligent power that is guiding your life with synchronicity, that, as you're going to see, has authored this consciousness field that unifies us all together in consciousness, do you honestly believe that the whole purpose of life on Earth is that we're just going to get vomited off the surface in a big tidal wave or in some sort of outgassing from the sun of fire or something? I don't think it's that simple at all. I think that when we're actually looking at our lives, we're getting all this growth material coming up. It's causing us to move through our deepest issues. And I wanted to make the point, which is, in this particular talk, I'm going to keep tying back in more about the whole spectrum of soul evolution. Because fundamentally what I'm seeing in the work that I'm doing and the research that you're going to be looking at here is that this is not just a time in which some of us are going to be so-called ascending into the Earth in fourth density, which is this plane above our own plane that is more harmonious. It is also possible for some of us to experience a full soul awakening, in which we're not only experiencing the unconditional love of fourth density, but we're experiencing the honor, the will, the responsibility, the healthy communication of fifth density, the unification of love and wisdom in sixth density, and the awareness of foreverness and timelessness in seventh density. So these are the real core principles of unifying negative and positive and seeing how all experiences that we move through are part of a continuum, which doesn't need to be labeled. In other words, we go through our lives and certain experiences we say are joyful and certain experiences we say are suffering. So when we want to get to what I call the touchdown ascension as opposed to the field goal, right? The field goal is just getting into fourth density. That just means you have an open heart, you love other people slightly more than you are manipulating, controlling them, and that allows you to graduate into the earth's... That's all you have to do. I mean, that's what's so crazy. I'm sure most of you guys... Is anybody not aware of my work at all? Is this like something you just dove into just to try it out? Okay, we got a few. So you're going to hear a little more about me in this presentation than you did in the keynote, because this is, the keynote is part of a larger conference, whereas this is my event. So I'll talk a little bit more about myself. Enough about me. What do you think about me? Oh, right, it's enough about me. What about you? What do you think about me? So I really... I feel that the changes that are happening on this planet are not random, they're not accidental, and they're not dangerous. Yes, they're dangerous in the sense that there's a big volcano going off right over on the other side of the island here. But in the sense that we are fundamentally interconnected by this conscious field. And I'm going a little bit off the edge here, and I wanted to be honest with you guys about this. I would prefer that this video never make it online, because there's a reason why you paid for this, and I'm giving you some stuff that you only are getting because you paid for it. This is stuff that I'm not going to put on the website yet, because some of it is going into my movie. And up until now, I've been extremely proprietary about not releasing any of the science that's going into my movie. So you guys are getting a sneak preview of something that will not be available for most people for another year at least. And I'm happy to do that. I don't feel negatively about that. The lawyers would probably be screaming at me if they found out that I was doing this, but... the point is that this information can't wait for an arbitrary release date of a movie. This information will help you today. It will change your life, and I do fundamentally believe that. So let's talk a little bit about the mojo here, the story that gets everybody kind of in the door and gets them excited at the beginning. It's something that I've had a great deal of difficulty coming to accept in myself. This is not something that I just said, oh wow, isn't this great? Now I can claim that I was somebody else and get famous. Not at all. This whole thing for me started out as a private personal experience, and it was only as a result of being dragged kicking and screaming into an awareness that these channelings that I was doing, for lack of a better term, were intended to be shared with everyone. There was very personal, private information in these channelings, and yet I did not hold back any of it. The readings, for example, told me I was masturbating too often, and said that I would really benefit from not doing that so much, because there's a randomized releasing of your vital energy that happens when you have an orgasm if you don't have someone to share it with you. When you do have someone to share it with you, you form a circuit, you form a continuum, and that allows for an actual raising of the overall vibration, whereas a solitary sexual experience, particularly for men, for some strange reason, the male physiology in the etheric anatomy is designed to have a randomized release of just pure power in the form of vital energy. I was going to try to work into my first film a concept about vital energy, which now it looks like we're probably not going to be able to use it until the second film. And for those of you who don't know, I am working in Hollywood on a film called Convergence. The basic idea started out as a documentary, and then we realized that it would be much more powerful and effective if we were able to do it as a drama where we have characters and fictional plot lines and things that will actually make it more of a story rather than just something where it's just a bunch of talking heads saying, gee whiz, isn't this great? So, again, originally the film started out as a documentary. We were going to talk about this Casey stuff. We've since gotten rid of all that. It was going to be a documentary. Now we have a drama. The drama has been through like 4 major rewrites. I mean, completely reformatting the entire story start to finish. New characters, new plot, new everything. And it's taken that long, 3.5 years, for us to figure out how to tell this story in the best possible way that we can. And actually, after I get back from this conference is when I'm going to be finishing that script. So, to get a little bit into the story of Edgar Cayce, we want to start with the man himself. He was born in 1877, died in 1945, and for his time, he was into what was the high technology, which was photography. And that sounds a little bit crazy, but back in those days, the ability to capture a moment in time as a perfect reflection that would always be there forever. As a painter, that's one thing, because you got an interpretation, but with a photograph, you've captured something. So Edgar Cayce was a photographer, and then he started to have experiences where he was losing his voice and couldn't speak actually for 9 or 10 months at a time. And ultimately, someone in desperation hypnotized him to try to see if they could figure out a way to cure him. And under hypnosis, he spoke with extreme amounts of wisdom, completely diagnosed his medical condition, prescribed a cure, and in fact, could speak as soon as he came out of trance after all this time. So these came to be called the psychic readings, and that's where the term originally came from, which is now widely misused all over the place with only $3.99 per minute. Well, that's his term. That's where it came from, because they were talking about the so-called Akashic record. The Cayce readings describe that all information that ever has been or will be exists now, outside of time, and it can all be accessed and moved through. And so you're actually going to see tonight the proof of the Akashic record, among other things, scientific proof that this field exists. So this is actually the bed that he would lie down on, where he would do these readings, and you notice to the right you see a little stenographer's desk and chair, and that's where his secretary, Gladys Davis, would take dictation. Now, these readings were so powerful that in some cases, if she spelled a word wrong, they would correct her in the reading and tell her how to spell it differently. And there's also, as many of you probably have heard if you've studied Cayce, there's a famous case where the readings were saying that there was a particular ingredient that they needed in a store in order to make this remedy to heal someone. And of course, the storekeeper says it's not there, and the reading says, no, you got to look behind the jar on the shelf, and da-da-da-da. Sure enough, they looked behind the jar on the shelf right where the reading said, and there it was. And so this is there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of wonderful psychic stories with Cayce. Now, in terms of reincarnational similarity, this is something we didn't talk about last time. You look at these pictures when he's a little bit younger, and he doesn't really look like me anywhere near as much. And one of the research conclusions that I came to is that this energy of our DNA, there's an energy of the soul that kind of formats our DNA and changes how we look over time gradually. There's a nudging influence that as we mature, sexually mature and so forth, gradually tweaks our appearance more and more in alignment with our soul. So as Cayce is younger, you see more and more of his genetic heritage coming through in terms of what the DNA from his parents made him look like. As he gets older, he looks more like me, and I look more like him as I get older. It's a very strange thing. That's my working hypothesis on that. Now, Sidney Kirkpatrick wrote what has become the definitive biography of Edgar Cayce now. It's called, I believe it's called Edgar Cayce, A Sleeping Prophet. And this book is really significant because for many, many years, all of Edgar Cayce's client list was kept strictly secret. No one could know who he did these readings for. The ARE, being Cayce's organization, kept it under tight lock and key. Kirkpatrick went in and was the first person to be given direct access to the readings in which the names could be named. And that will be significant, as you see in a second. So Kirkpatrick comes up with 10 facts about Edgar Cayce that he uses to sell the book. They're very interesting, so we're going to use them all here. Cayce was not a fraud. Even the most clever con man wouldn't have been capable of delivering 14,145 fully documented trance readings over a period of 45 years, of which no two were alike, and over 90% are believed to have been correct. It's like a Las Vegas nightclub performer having to perform an entirely new act every day, twice a day, for almost 20 years. Okay, second fact. Casey underwent psychic testing by deans at Harvard Medical School and Columbia University. Though these eminent physicians were unable to explain his psychic powers, they could not deny that he possessed them. Oops. Here. That's Houdini for you. Yeah, it's his energy. Harry Houdini met his match in Edgar Casey, though the famous illusionist, he was the James Randi of his time, though the famous illusionist met with Casey and witnessed a trance reading, he too was at a loss to explain these incredible psychic powers. So nobody ever successfully debunked him. You know, now if the skeptics want to say that, oh, none of it was true, well, they tried at the time and it didn't work. Okay, Casey's medical, let's make sure, I don't know why there's no number 4 there. How? Okay. Maybe it's 9.5 facts about Edgar Casey. Casey's medical readings were used by 3 of New York's most prominent physicians to treat such, here comes the name dropping, right? This is the sizzle in Hollywood. To treat such noteworthy people as Irving Berlin, George Gershwin, Gloria Swanson, Marilyn Monroe, Nelson Rockefeller, labor leader George Meany, and the author William Saroyan. So this was not just something that somebody was doing that was a little novelty. This was attracting the luminaries of the time. People got really excited about this. Though Edgar Casey has long been known as a medical clairvoyant, his most astonishing readings were given for inventors and scientists. Now this is even more name-dropping. Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla had trance readings by Casey, as did engineers from RCA, IBM, Delco, and the president and founder of the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. So obviously what we're seeing here is that these guys are getting useful technical information, including Tesla, who's now considered the best inventor of the 20th century. Most of his stuff has been forgotten. Remarkable technological and electronic designs provided by Casey in trance are now used in almost every large hospital and airport in the world. That is also a fact. Ernest Hemingway's mother consulted Casey about her son's writing career. Carl Laemmle of Universal Studios, Harry Getz of Paramount Pictures, and legendary film pioneer Thomas Ince developed film projects dictated during Casey's trances. It's also a fact that Casey designed a board game that became famous, and he lost the credit for that. Now here's the real big one. A lot of people do not know this. Casey gave readings to President Woodrow Wilson as he was struggling to create the League of Nations. Casey warned that another great war would result from Congress's failure to support the president in the creation of the League. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands because it is technically anonymous, but if any of you here have ever been to Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or any of these 12-step meetings, it is also a documented fact from multiple people who were there back when it happened that the 12-step program, the 12 steps themselves, were dictated word for word without any edits out of a Casey reading. That's where they came from. Bill Wilson is one of the guys on this list, and he's the guy that founded AA. Though Casey's predictions represent less than 2% of his readings, he accurately predicted the great stock market crash, the rise and fall of Adolf Hitler, Japan's sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, and the deaths of 2 American presidents. However, as he would say in trance, the best thing any trance warning could accomplish would be to incite change, which would subsequently change the direction the future would take. Casey's life has touched tens of thousands of followers, including Elvis Presley, who was reading a copy of one of Casey's books when he died, rock star John Lennon, film director Steven Spielberg, and actress Shirley MacLaine. So anytime they want to meet with me, that's come on over. Hey, baby, this is Elvis. I'm talking in your dreams. You got to come to Graceland. So here I am, 7 years old. I've had this out-of-body when I was 5, this out-of-body experience where I'm floating over my own body. And then I felt like I screwed up because I got scared, and I floated a little distance away, and then I got thinking I was going to die, and I snapped back in. By the time I was 7, I was hungry to know more, so I did read this book when I was 7 years old. And again, half of you saw this yesterday. The interesting point here is that in the chapter on your healing power, I felt compelled to stick this little sticker in there that dated when I was reading the book as 1981, proving that I was 8 years old at the time that I read this. Why would I put a sticker in a book that I'm reading as a 7, 8-year-old kid about ESP in the chapter on using psychic ability to heal people? Maybe there's a reincarnation, as we'll see. Hypnosis is another one of the books I read here, and this one as well. These books Basically, I felt like this was somehow really important to the study of ESP. It turns out, of course, Casey was hypnotized to go into readings. Now, this is something I didn't go through yesterday. I found this just like, you just find new stuff as you go along. This is something that I found going through old papers when I was at my mother's house a couple winters ago. When I was in 5th grade or so, I wrote this story about the sunken continent of Mayalika, which was off the coast of Hawaii, or of Florida. And you can see my very crude depiction of Florida here with the Okefenokee Swamp, and then where I believe the island was. And it basically is describing this cycle of time in which the island sinks and then it's going to rise again, which is totally right out of the Edgar Cayce readings, that Atlantis was off the coast of Florida, that it sank, and that at the end of our age it would rise once again. So this just is another one of many layers of confirmation showing that these memories of some kind from another lifetime might have been bleeding through. Now here's another one. This was something that I saw. I don't know if he's giving us the finger or exactly what that's supposed to be on the left there. Now, I was very convinced that he was intelligent. It was very important that I write that down, that he was an intelligent being. I wrote a story. This is another thing that I found. It just totally tripped me out when I saw this. I wrote a story about an astronaut who floated out of the Earth, and he was just floating through the air, and he goes to this other planet, which I think I called Planet Z or something like that. And he met with these beings that in my story I called the Seasiz, spelled S-E-S-I-Z-Z. And the Seasiz basically kept him captive on their world for a while. And then he finally was able to escape their world and come back. And in my typical humble way, I became very famous, worldwide famous, for having gone through this and surviving to come back and tell the planet. So anyway, this was an actual drawing, clearly showing what looks like the typical gray physiology, but long before I heard about it. And I had this vision again later on. I was seeing the same kind of head. This is before the Whitley Strieber books came out, but this time I corrected the jaw, made it larger. It appears to be a diagram of someone sitting on their back on the ground with a UFO hovering overhead and two beings bent at the waist looking down at you, except that I widened the shoulders and the jaws because what I saw in the vision didn't really seem right to me. Again, this is really fascinating, especially because there's an intimate connection between the Edgar Cayce readings and his past life in Atlantis as Ra-Ta, which supposedly was working with an extraterrestrial group known as Ra to the Egyptians. And there up at the top, if you look at that little circle, you can almost see like two wings, like the winged disc emblem from Egypt. If you look at the shoulders of each being as being one of the wings. That I didn't see until very recently, actually just a couple years ago. And again, this was something I sculpted in jewelry class, and years later I had the book by Jose Arguelles called Mayan Factor. I opened right up to the page in the bookstore where he explains that this symbol means the ability to communicate with galactic consciousness. And that really tripped me out because I had no idea what I was sculpting when I made it. So this is the big prophecy, and again, I would love it if it was easy for me to talk about this stuff. It actually is not, but I'm putting it in here because I feel like I should share with you what we know. This is a Cayce reading, 294-151. This is the prophecy about whoever was going to reincarnate as Edgar Cayce. Is it not fitting then that these, a reference to Ra-Ta and his friends, would return? As this priest may develop himself, that's an important word there, not necessarily will, but may, develop himself to be in that position, to be in that capacity as a liberator. The word a is important. It's not a messianic return. A liberator of the world in its relationships to individuals in those periods to come, for he must enter again in that period or in 1998. So basically, there's all these people in Virginia Beach now, come 1998, who are expecting Edgar Cayce to return, but maybe like as a baby. I was guided by my readings to show up at Virginia Beach in the tail end of 1997, and everybody started recognizing me as the spitting image of a young Edgar Cayce. Plus, I was now doing my own form of psychic readings, which you can hear much more about. And since almost all of you know my story, we're not going to go into all that stuff, because you can find it all on the website. And it's also important to remember that Cayce saw himself back in Virginia Beach in a dream, surrounded by many of those who'd been with him at that earlier time. So this means that I end up in Virginia Beach in 1998 without planning on fulfilling a prophecy, and yet multiple layers of these prophecies came true, including the fact that other people who I'd reincarnate with again would be there, and that is what ended up happening, as we're about to see. So I've been doing this trance work, which you can hear more about for the few of you who don't know my work. It started out just as something I called the dream voice. I'd wake up in the morning and I'd write down whatever the background chatter in my mind was, just take notes on it. And it started to say some amazing stuff, and I was able to just get my mind out of the way and not interfere with the data. I started getting future prophecies. I started getting all kinds of amazing things happening. A year later, I eventually got to the point where I asked the bottom line question, and it said, in short, the answer is yes. You need to review your whole life and see the parallels. And I was having a hard time. It's very difficult for me to accept this. And it told me to bury this concept would not be wise for you. It's very important you make other people aware of this. We do not have time for you to hide it. We understand you'll be tested, and we feel it imperative you take the necessary precautions to ensure that you're ready. Be it known that you are not as configured this time for medical readings and one-on-one counseling. This is one of those involvements we wanted to change. We would like to see you progress in the direction of spending more time teaching universal concepts to the masses. That's you guys. This would be the highest utilization of your creative force. So I guess I'm doing that. I did do readings for about 7 years, and then I stopped. I had a huge amount of demand. And this was another thing, you know, back then I had no idea I was going to be doing any of this stuff. I mean, it was still just all overwhelming to me. I hadn't even started to take clients yet. That's another thing the readings started to hit me with, that they wanted me to take clients. But anyway, when I was living in Virginia Beach and everybody's recognizing me and saying, oh, he looks just like Edgar Cayce and all this stuff, just on a whim one day, months after I'd first heard this, I said, let me just run my chart against Edgar's chart. And I was absolutely astonished. Now, I don't know, do I have a laser pointer here? I guess I do. Yeah, okay. So check this out, right? The first thing I notice, of course, is sun over sun. Well, that's pretty obvious because he's March 18th and I'm March 8th, so we're only 10 days apart. Venus over Venus, perfect, right? Now, you can't really see it because they bump things together here, but Mercury is almost directly over Mercury. It's only off by, you know, less than one house. You got Mars over Mars right here. You got the moon, which is right here, over the moon right here. That's very, very close. That's within 1 degree of the entire circle. And then you have these really tight angles between the other planets. I mean, this is a perfect angle. You see 2 degrees to 2 degrees here. I mean, this chart is just loaded, and I was just dazzled when I saw this. I couldn't believe it. So here's just a really simplified breakdown. Not even getting into the details, but just the gross things. Sun in the same sign, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, the same year of the zodiac. That means only 1 out of 12 years that I could have been born. Moon is in 1/360th, so it's the same exact degree. You know, we ran some rough statistical calculations on this kind of thing. To have the facial similarity and to have this astrology connection is just off the charts, like billions and billions to 1, that it could be some kind of an accident. So here's the comparison shot for those of you who haven't seen this. This is by the time he was around his early to mid-20s, and of course that's the same age that I was. Very stunning likeness, as you can tell. And again, this is my brother, and this is one of Casey's close associates in the early days of the readings. This is my father after a Metallica concert. That's why he's sneering. And this is Edgar Cayce's father, both of whom... Casey's father was called the Squire. My father went to the so-called Squire shop for his men's clothing. This is my best friend Jude from high school. This is Casey's associate Edwin Blumenthal. This is one of my best friends from college, Christopher, and this is Casey's associate Morton Blumenthal. This is my best female friend from college, Angelica, and Casey's wife, Gertrude. So you can see here there's clearly a lot of similarity between these personalities. So fast forward to 3.5 years ago, I'm in LA. Somebody says to me after they see a talk like with the information you're about to see now, my gosh, this is so amazing, we should make a movie out of this. And that was my co-producer, Billy Blake, and that was where our project was born. So fascinatingly enough, this is a view out of my window when I'm doing my work every day at home. And it just so happens that the person who lives below me is a New Ager. Now, my challenges have gone on. I mean, you can see there's a little pyramid here, okay, and there's like a little stone circle down there. And then, of course, this is the key figure. This is a picture I took from one of the first days I was there, because I live up in the mountains, of a man crucified. Now, it's not like when you're working the spiritual path that things get easy and you just kind of coast through. You're constantly working. You're constantly dealing with your heaviest stuff. And dealing with this film has been very, very heavy for me. And I feel like I've been through a lot of shifts, and I'm hoping that together we can move through shifts together. I was utterly astonished because I see this thing every day, and it felt so much like a portrait of myself. A whole lot of things have shifted for me recently in very wonderful ways. I feel very blessed to be here. I had stopped doing conferences for 2 years. I don't know if you're aware of that. I didn't want to go out into the public. I just wanted to hide out at home. And I'm dealing with all this film politics and investors and the shark-filled waters of Hollywood. So then all of a sudden one day, I look out my window, and this is what was happening. They had taken him down off the cross. And they're actually digging out the path here so that he could be pulled down the side of the mountain. You can see it's not really Jesus. He's got the beard and he's bald. And this just blew me away. It was such a powerful statement of synchronicity that my whole life has changed, so that even something that seems so immovable as this weird crucifix in your window every day, that just disappeared. Just poof, it's gone. So there you have it. So these things are happening to all of us, and it's like you can expect big holographic shifts to happen in your own life. So this is where we get into the stuff that I like to talk about. I don't really like the Casey stuff because for me it's old news, but consciousness science, this is what I really want to focus on. I don't really want to end up getting asked everybody when I go on any radio shows or whatever, so do you think you're Edgar Cayce's? I don't know, whatever. This is what's fun for me. Is consciousness a living, active, and transferable source of energy? Because the things you're about to learn here are going to affect everything. If you can really pay attention and study what I'm saying and make sense out of this for your own life, you're going to see some things that you may have never thought of before that will utterly change your perspective. I'm going to start simple, and I'm just going to show you that there's some really solid mainstream backing, and then we're going to get more esoteric. Dr. Aaron Schumann has a theory of neural broadcasting. This is one of the mainstream scientists now coming out with this. She has made a scientific discovery that when your brain cells are firing off, individual neurons fire off, the neurons that are near them in the brain also fire off even though they do not have dendrites connecting from one cell to another. That's a field effect. That means that cells nearby the cell that's firing off are also firing off. That's a proven brain physiology fact, which nobody is talking about. This is a very prominent neurosurgeon, Dr. Benjamin Libet, who has now come up with a theory of the mental field, which states, in fact, that he was looking into brain-body interactions in 1983 and saw, among other things, that the brain prepared the body to move 350 milliseconds before the conscious mind knew that it was going to move. Now, that's pretty weird. 200 milliseconds remain between the time that you became aware and the time that you actually moved, so this gives you enough time to veto the movement. So what this really means is that there's some kind of energy field that senses the future before it happens. Like, your body hasn't actually moved yet, but somehow your nervous system reacts when it's going to, and it gives you just enough time to not move if you choose to. So this is actually, there's a thing in the Seth books by Jane Roberts where Seth talks about how if it wasn't for the fact that you were outside of linear time, you would burn yourself, your reflexes would never work, because the bending power of time is actually required in order to have your reflexes function. Well, this is a scientific validation of that. Now, I'm sure everybody here, there's probably nobody that hasn't seen this. This is Dr. Masaru Emoto. Water from the Fujiwara Dam before it's been prayed over, and then after it's been prayed over, this is what happens when you melt it down and then refreeze it. You see these beautiful crystals forming. So again, this is another form showing, which is now very popular in mainstream, especially in Japan, that consciousness in this case has a direct effect on water and how water is crystallizing. Okay, now we're going to talk about something that I really like. This is Dr. Cleve Baxter, a polygraph specialist who took this plant, actually when it was younger, and just one day decided to hook up a lie detector to it. He connected it to one of the leaves here. And he realized something fantastic was happening. The plant was having a reaction, which you see on this graph here, that doesn't look anything like what you would normally expect a plant to be. He didn't think a plant would have much lifelike activity in its electromagnetic action, but instead it looks almost just like a human being. So then he starts to think, well, how could I make this plant have a sudden shock? How could I do something? This is February 1968, February 2nd. How could I make this plant have a shock? So he taps the plant with a pen, gets a little bit of a reaction. It's only when, and some of you probably, if you're old enough and you don't have to give yourselves away, remember this from when it first came out, he got the idea to strike a match and hold it to the leaf. He didn't actually do it. He just thought about doing it. And that alone made the plant go into an outrageous shock reaction, as you can see here. It just saturated the graph. The needle went all the way up to the hilt because it was such a huge reaction. Okay, so there's some quotes here from Deepak Chopra, Gene Houston. This is his book, obviously showing a lot of mainstream credentials that he was highly regarded for having discovered this. This is him in 1945. Now we're just going to go through some of his studies because they're so fascinating. Now people have yelled at me in the past from an audience, so in deference to them, I'm putting this in here. The first person who discovered this was L. Ron Hubbard, founder of Scientology. This is how he first did it with fruits and so forth on one of his e-meters, which they used for the auditing. This was in the 1950s, so that was before Baxter. That is, I think it's 1958 or something like that. So he did discover it first, but the reason why I talk about Baxter is Baxter's research is a lot more in-depth and goes through many, many forms of life. So this is the historic plant from 1966. This is actually where he burned the leaf and he cut it off. I actually had the pleasure of going down and interviewing him at his lab, and we talked about these experiments he was doing. This is the very beginning of when he first put the electrodes on, and then it started to mellow out after a while. This is the moment at which he burned the plant, or thought of burning the plant. He didn't actually do it. And then he actually does burn the plant at some point, right here, yeah. And the plant's just going crazy this whole time. And it wasn't until he actually went out of the room and left the room with the matches in his hand that the plant finally could relax and calm back down. Now, this is why I tell people if they're really like crazy vegetarian diet, right? Death is part of life. Death is part of being alive, and so even if you're cooking plants, they're going to be screaming too. There's always going to be something happening. So, sorry to burst your bubble, but this is what they're doing. Now, that being said, there's an important caveat to that, and that is that multiple researchers have found that if you actually take the time to bless your food and send it notice that you're going to be eating it, what happens is that it doesn't do this when it gets cooked. It kind of just accepts the fact that it's being used for this honorable purpose to help you and heal you, and it will go through with it admirably and with a smile on its face, if it had a face. So this is another fascinating thing that happened where he started to break out of just seeing it as plants. He had the plant hooked up one day, and he hadn't done anything weird to it, and then all of a sudden he gets this huge reaction. What was that? And then he traced it back, and he's like, okay, well, what did I actually do? The only thing that he could realize that he'd done is he had a pot of boiling water that he used to clean out the coffee machine, and he poured it into the sink. Well, now, Baxter's lab, I've been there. Okay, it's not very clean, so the sink was loaded with all these little bacteria, little living bacteria. So they're screaming and they're dying, right? And because the bacteria are dying in the sink, the plants went nuts because they sensed the death of the bacteria. So this is the electrode that he put on the leaves in order to get the reaction. Then he creates this barbaric experiment where he takes brine shrimp, because he said this was the quote-unquote most expendable life form he could come up with that he could kill, to see if he could get plants to be scared and scream. This is the Hitlerian device that he came up with in order to kill brine shrimp at random. There's he's got a good sense of humor. It's not like he's going to be offended. So up here you see the barbaric little dump cups filled with living brine shrimp, which are then catapulted to their death in this boiling water completely at random. And then what he did is he got these plants hooked up in the room. This is where the shrimp were dying, and this is his lab, and I've seen the outline here when I was in there. And then he hooked the plants up to the lie detectors, polygraphs, in different rooms. Now what he found was that this did not work unless all the people were out of the building. If there's people in the building, the plants are more than happy to tune into your energy. They don't care if the brine shrimp die unless there's nobody else around. But if the plant's all lonely, and it's there alone at night, and there's nobody around, and then something dies, these plants would go crazy. And he was able to document that. Now, the reason why other scientists did try to replicate this and it didn't work, but it's consciousness science. There's new protocols, and you have to follow the protocol, which includes the fact that you can't have people around, or else it won't work, because they'll just like to hear you more than anything else. So the experiments got more involved when he started to use eggs. He electroded actual eggs out of the refrigerator. Okay, now you've taken away my salad, now you're going to take away my eggs. Oh, here we go. It's important to bless your food, because you're going to see what happens here in just a second. First of all, just an ordinary egg now he found had electrical activity. Even though it was unfertilized, you can see it's got this cyclical activity like it's getting ready to be a life form. And in fact, an EKG, a brainwave meter, showed a very simple brainwave coming out of these eggs, if you can believe that. I know, this is kind of gross, isn't it? EEG shows complex cycles of activity, as you can see here, by how these circles align with each other. So there's multiple cycles of electrical activity in regular patterns coming from that little chicken egg. So this is his little cat, Sammy. And one day he decided to pick Sammy up just at random, and Sammy was asleep, and he didn't like it at all. So he starts squirming and going crazy. And of course, the eggs and the plants in the room, in this case it was a African violet. The African violet goes completely nuts at the moment that the cat was picked up. So this was the first sign that he had to show that animals, and what happens to animals, even if they just get stressed out, are being picked up by plants. Now here's the one that will make you think twice when you have hard-boiled eggs. He wires he wires up the chicken egg. Here you see the normal, slow, relaxed, meditative, cyclical pattern. Oh shit, what's all this? Each one of these circles is a new egg that he dropped into the boiling water. Okay? Now that's easily documented. This is stuff that we are going to have in the movie. An African violet, just when he was thinking about breaking an egg before he actually did it, that's how the African violet reacted. So it's like all of nature is tuning in. Then he saw something that was happening with bacteria, and at no additional charge you get to see one of my pubic hairs in this slide right here. That's for your own viewing pleasure. I was scanning this, pictures of yogurt kind of get me worked up, so I have this bacteria thing. It's just, I don't know. So and unfortunately, this pubic hair returns later on. In the sequel, that's right, in the next film. So this is an example where he's getting chicken cooked up for his cat. Sammy was very spoiled. And then he cooks the chicken, which was sitting in the refrigerator for too long, so he heats it up. And as these bacteria are dying, the other bacteria in the yogurt now, he's electroded yogurt, is reacting. And then as he feeds the cat, of course, the bacteria screams even more. So here's another example of the same kind of thing. Bacteria reacting to the death of other bacteria. This is an example where he had a vodka and tonic drink, and he stirred some vodka into yogurt while other yogurt was wired up, and it screams. So think about that the next time you're having a drink and that there's these bacteria in your stomach, right? And they're screaming whenever you have a drink. Now check this guy out. He's kind of like, yeah, I don't know about this. This guy's kind of full of it, whatever. Here he's got a split screen where at the bottom you're actually seeing the polygraph, and everybody's just kind of having this little conversation. Here's our skeptic, right? And you're seeing there's no reaction from the yogurt. He's got more yogurt right here. And then he has an antibiotic. And on camera, he stirs it in. And I have this film footage. I have to get it into the PowerPoint presentation. Check out what our little skeptic guy does once he gets the reaction. Oh, shit! Now he's paying attention because you get this big curve right at the moment that he stirs in the antibiotic. Now, He says you have to do this spontaneously because if you let the yogurt know that it's going to die, it doesn't freak out. That's the funny thing. The yogurt says, oh, okay, here we go. And there's no reaction. So again, here's another example. This is the actual raw graph from that session. Oh, and of course, the infamous, can you really see it here or not? There's my pubic hairs in there somewhere. Okay. This is the same plant from the original experiment, so as we can see, he's kept it in very good care. He was so shocked by that plant burning experiment, he could never burn a plant again. And this plant was well loved for the rest of his career. I saw the plant. It was actually dying when I got there. It had just gotten too big. As you can see, he had to tie it off from the ceiling and stuff. So we're going to go back in a little, do more Baxter in a minute, but now we're going to go into something else, which probably a lot of you have heard, the so-called 100th monkey study. Japanese scientists looked at macaque monkeys. Between 52 and 58, they were dropping in sweet potatoes from helicopters in the dirt for them. The sweet potatoes were covered with dirt, so the monkeys couldn't eat them without hurting their teeth. Some of the monkeys learned to wash the potatoes, and after approximately 100 monkeys figured out this skill, suddenly all the monkeys on all the islands acquired the skill. So it's sort of like downloading a Windows update or something, right? So why is this important? What we just saw with Baxter is that there is this consciousness field where if we were all to have a shock right now, if you could wire it, I'm assuming these are real. If we could wire up these flowers right here next to me, like if I suddenly hurt myself, these flowers are going to have a reaction to my pain. That's been proven. So that shows that there's some sort of, the plant thinks there might be survival value here. If I suddenly get the idea I'm going to burn this plant, when the plant goes into shock, it sends more sap up into the leaves, so it gives it a little bit of an edge so that it might not burn as much. So it appears that this consciousness field is being used in the animal kingdom for survival value. Look at some of the things you've just seen, right? You see the African violet reacting to a cat. You see plants reacting to the death of bacteria, bacteria reacting to the death of other bacteria. You're seeing eggs, right? The eggs reacting to other eggs. You see just all these different examples. So it's like the whole kingdom of nature is talking to each other to make sure that everything's okay. So here what we're seeing is that a skill that actually has value for survival becomes something that gets spread out through the entire species of these macaque monkeys. So if you'll excuse the terrifically bad pun, these guys are not just monkeying around. Oh, boy. Now, I put that slide in basically just to show you what they look like, because it kind of helps for me to humanize the thing and give us, here they are, and you might not have ever seen animals think about them this way before. Now, if you've ever looked at like schools of fish, you notice how they move like in such an amazingly tight movement like that, and birds, flocks of birds, there's an interesting triangular pattern here. Well, what if this behavior is not just random? What if they're all actually sharing a mind? That appears to be what's happening, that when they get together, they just sort of, their thoughts naturally are blending with each other. And enough of them think the same way, and they start doing the same thing, like the monkeys. Enough of them think about washing the potatoes, they start to wash the potatoes. Now, this is a really cool one. I don't know if you guys saw this. It's called the sheep circle. This came out just a couple months ago. It appears that there are these natural earth energy vortexes, and we're going to get into this in a little while, and they're circular in shape. And this farmer saw two different circles like this form. All the sheep, for whatever reason, even though they were hungry, they formed into this circle, and they all wanted to stay in that energy for some reason. It was like it was healing them or helping them somehow. And then there was another one that formed like this, but as soon as there was a loud noise, they all got scared and they ran away. But that shows... nobody could explain why this was happening. I mean, there's only like maybe one or two here that are not perfectly in the circle. The rest of them are just in this perfect circle. Now, this is really going to trip you out if you haven't been tripped out already. Dr. René Piach in France, again, this is some of the real good mojo stuff that I was going to save for the documentary. You guys are getting an exclusive look at this. He did an experiment where he took 15 baby chicks and put them in a box, and then he imprints them on a light in an adjacent box. So imagine now there's a pane of glass here. These are like two boxes, right? And this little thing is a robot. And so what it does is it moves around randomly. There's a random number generator making this thing move around. And then he tells all these chicks, by showing it to them as the first thing they see, he tells the chicks, this is your mother. So these chicks have a strong emotional desire for their mother to come closer. Well, guess what happens? This is what happens when you put a black sheet of paper in front of the chicks. The robot makes random movements. Okay? When the chicks can see the robot that they think is their mother, their intent actually changes the path that the random numbers make so that this little guy is driving right in front of the window because they want their mother to be close to them. So what this tells me is that we're dealing in an intelligent reality in which there is a field of consciousness that interfaces with electromagnetic energy to such an extent that if you set out an intention strong enough that you want something to happen, the universe is going to find a way to make it happen. Can I get an amen on that? I mean, that is fantastic. I mean, this just blows my mind. I still get shivers just doing that one. So, just to get down to the raw numbers here, and you can look this up, Piach, okay? I'm not hiding any of this from you. I'm not kind of like suppressing the scientist's name. He did it 80 different times with these groups of 15 chicks. 71% of the time, the robot hovered near the window. Over 80 trials. That's replicability. That's science, right? You have to do the same darn thing over and over and over again. That's what he did, and it still kept on working, which is fantastic. So now we've done the whole animal kingdom. You've seen, for example, the Windows updates downloading into the monkeys, the so-called 100th monkey effect. You've seen schools of fish moving together. You've seen Renee Piach and these chicks where they set out the intention, and the intention comes back. What about us? Because why isn't this stuff working for us? If this is happening all throughout the animal kingdom, then we should be getting these signals too, right? And why don't we hear it? Well, maybe the thing is that we're hearing it, but we just have tuned it out. Our conscious mind tunes out natural influences that come in. So here's how Baxter was able to show what happens with our own cells. He had people take cultures from their own mouth. You'd swab Q-tip inside your mouth, get what he calls oral leukocytes, which is basically just white blood cells from the skin of your cheek. And you put it inside a test tube, you whirl it around in this thing, which makes it all rise up to the top. You skim off those living cells, and you put them inside a tiny, tiny little test tube with two tiny, tiny little gold wires. And by doing that, what we got was, oh, here we go. The white blood cells from mouth. This is in one particular case now. He hooks up the cells to the polygraph. This donor drives to the airport 300 miles away. Okay? Along the way, he documented every time that he had an upset, a wrong turn, or a shocking event, wrote down exactly what time it was, and they'd synchronized watches, and every single event showed up as electrical activity in his cells 300 miles away. That is fantastic. Now, here's another example. In this case, Dr. Baxter had one of his associates look at a Playboy magazine, which was the Bo Derek 10 movie pictorial. Okay, so it's obviously a erotic, stimulating magazine. He's got his cells wired up in the other room. The guy starts looking at the pictures, and Baxter says, "Just would you please look at the centerfold for me?" And this guy is like saying, "Oh well, I don't think she's a 10." He's having this kind of whole thing, but his cells were showing a completely different reaction. So he met his match. Okay, now here's one where he's had cells from a fighter pilot. See, the problem is you got to figure out how to shock people authentically. That's why these experiments are so hard to do. Everybody's got a different trigger, and unless it's a genuine emotional shock, it doesn't work. So one way he fooled somebody was a fighter pilot. He shows them a film of a plane crash, and at the moment that the plane hits the ocean, this guy had a huge spike in his cells. This is one where a mother had given him cells, and then her daughter calls up on the cell phone. She goes off into the other room. Her daughter's having a crisis with her boyfriend, and at that moment she's got this shock. Right as she hangs up the phone, click, there's a big shock in her cells. Now, just imagine what this means, right? Because, okay, you give birth to a child. Wouldn't you say some of your cells are in the child? So granted, if your cells 300 miles away are reacting to your shock, doesn't it make sense that your children would also react? Well, this seems to be part of what's happening here. She's attuning to the vibrations of her own kid as well as having her own reaction. So basically the idea here is that we are already equipped with a hyperdimensional communication technology. We have seen now that we can get information that has survivable value. We can see now that certain people like Edgar Cayce have taken it way beyond the scientific background that I just gave you here to a point that you get a much more elaborate form of communication with the higher planes. And the question now is, how do we switch it on? Or is it being switched on for us? AKA enter 2012. This is where we're getting into the 2012 stuff. And we're getting into the information about how our consciousness is being activated and up-leveled by forces beyond our own individual control. In order to start laying the ground for this, we have to go through some new studies that, again, talk about the consciousness field. This is Dr. Dean Radin from Princeton. In this case, we have the Global Consciousness Project. Probably a lot of you have seen this. There's 37 computers around the world which chunk out random numbers. We already saw, remember, with the Piotr study, that the little chicks were able to move this robot around by the simple changing of the random numbers. So somehow these random number generators are interacting with consciousness. So here you have 37 computers around the world generating random numbers, and you can measure how random they are. When major events happen around the world, focusing people's attention, there's a spontaneous decrease in the randomness of the numbers that are generated. So this, we're going to see some more of this here. This is a study that just showing that it's done on a small level, like we are a group of people gathered in a room, obviously, right now. You're focusing your attention on this one thing with me. Just by doing that, if we had a random number generator in the room, what we would find is that it would have a substantial decrease in randomness. So think about that. We're actually creating coherent energy fields in the room right now, kind of like the 15 chicks, by just focusing our minds and staying in a state of peace and harmony and tranquility right now. We're actually affecting the electromagnetic energy around us. Now, people ask me sometimes, why do you think the randomness changes? A random number generator requires that the electricity continue to flow the same way in these computer chips. So if you do little hiccups in the energy going through the chips, if you're changing electromagnetic energy a little bit, then the randomness is going to change. So what you're really doing is you're affecting all the energy around us, basic electromagnetism, enough that it can actually hurt your computers. And some people have had that experience, right? You get angry and your computer stops working for you. Say, how many people have had that happen? Okay, that's a little bit, about half. Now here's another example of it. O.J. Simpson's trial. These are 37 computers around the world. Everybody was worried, you know, there might be race riots. We didn't know what was going to happen if O.J. was found guilty. So as the TV pre-shows begin, all these computers around the world have a huge reaction. As the broadcast begins, it gets even more intense, and check this out. As soon as O.J. was declared non-guilty, the whole world just chilled out because they realized, okay, now that means we're not going to have these horrible riots and people killing each other in the streets and stuff. That's a worldwide example. 9/11 is a great example. There's a decreasing trending curve up to, and these are numbers of days, okay? So September 11th here, now check this out. We start to have a reaction where it starts going back up in a very clear trend line before September 11th. And it's only as the day goes on and people realize what's happening that it gets more and more intense over time. This is one of the greatest reactions they ever saw in the entire history of the study, and what's particularly fascinating about it is that they have 37 different computers around the world. The closer the computers were to 9/11, the stronger the reaction was. So it's very much a worldwide energy field. So here you're seeing the first crash, the second crash, the Pentagon crash, the first building goes down, the second building goes down. It's only after all these things came together and everybody started hearing about it that the graph really goes and just skyrockets. Now, this is another thing that's really fascinating. There was a worldwide prayer vigil, September 14th, and the graph goes in the opposite direction. Look at that. That's actually showing you the emotional state of every person on this planet getting more and more relaxed as time goes on as a result of a small number of people meditating coming together. Now, this is Dr. Daniel Benor, who shows that this energy of consciousness is directly related to healing and can heal the body. Here's his book, Spiritual Healing. And again, I know a lot of you guys have heard of this before. It's not like this is new, but you may not have heard the exact documentation like this. He looked at 191 different scientific studies of healing. That's a huge number. The people that were being healed were not even aware they were part of an experiment. The healing work in many cases was conducted at a distance, sometimes from New York to Los Angeles. Fully 64% of 191 healing studies demonstrated a profound result. Now, this is your secret weapon when people come out and say, oh, there was a study that was done that showed that spiritual healing doesn't work. So the whole thing is crap. That might have been one of the other 36%. But 64% of them did show a reaction, and they did work. That's really, really important. So if we can heal other people at a distance from coast to coast, then just the simple power of our intent has an incredible ability to heal. Entered this so-called Maharishi effect, promoted by John Hagelin in the movie What the Bleep Do We Know. This is him with the inset of Maharishi University where some of these studies were conducted. And here's one of the first early examples of it. You get a group of people like us meditating together. There was more people. In these cases, the groups were like, several hundred, or even sometimes they got up to like 7,000. But this was a 6-month period from 1983 to 84 with intense wars going on in Lebanon. And I believe this was happening either in Lebanon or in Israel, but it was somewhere really close by. And as they did these assemblies, look at this. This is the level of peace and war based on statistical documentation. And this is where people are meditating. So especially when you look here, as everybody started to meditate together, there's a dramatic increase in the amount of peaceful activity, the cessation of hostilities, all this stuff. But the real winner statistic is what we're about to see with what happens when 7,000 people get together. So transcendental meditation, the reason why this is scientific is it's teaching a non-denominational standard form of meditation. Everybody does it the same way. That's how you get science out of it. Groups of 7,000 people trained in these techniques got together for a group meditation week, and during those weeks, the worldwide level of terrorism and crime was reduced by 72%. I mean, that is phenomenal. Just think about the implications of that for a second. We have enough people in this room, and we're going to do it later on, to help have a real effect on the whole planet, on how people are thinking, how they're feeling, the level of peace and harmony in the world. So here's one of the graphs on that. So, could consciousness save the world? Apparently so. Is consciousness only being transferred between living organisms? Well, this is a really important question, right? Every single thing that I've showed you so far is between living organisms. Okay? What happens if we take this out of the equation of living and into the equation of the background energy of the universe, like the Earth, for example? Does it still work when we go out to that level? Does the Earth generate its own consciousness field? That's what we're about to find out. And if so, could we design a technology that would harness it? Well, this is where we get into the Russian pyramids, which I promised those of you who were here for the last talk we were going to talk about. This is a 144-foot tall pyramid. What you're seeing here are people at the bottom, in case you don't see that very clearly. So this thing is enormous. It's built inside with PVC pipes, and then the outside is faced with fiberglass. As I told you before, if you were here at the last talk, it's very important that you not build any metal into this, because metal attracts these energy fields. So this is harnessing energy that's coming out of the Earth. And we're going to get into how that works. Here's another picture of it from a different angle, just so you can get a sense of the size and the scope of this thing. Here's more pictures of it. Now there's where you can see sort of like the framework of the pipes inside, how it was built, how it was put together. You can see that the panels of the fiberglass were kind of put on an angle to the side there. Here's another one that they built over some oil wells in a different part of Russia, which is not quite as tall as the other one. Here's another pyramid that was built in a different area, more in the country. So this is one of the things that happens. You build a pyramid, you get a substantial increase in oil well productivity. Okay? That's very fascinating. You get highly substantial results of healing, poison, disease, even cancer. Now, what does that mean? These Russians actually took little white underbred mice that you use for laboratory experiments and would give them various things like cancer, and then would stick them into the consciousness field inside the pyramid, and they would have substantial decreases in the amount of tumors that would form. He actually took newborn babies. One of the scientists took newborn babies and fed them 1 milliliter of water that had been stored in the pyramid. That's it, 1 milliliter. And the premature babies that were given the 1 milliliter of pyramid water got to practically normal levels of health. And the other babies that were not given the pyramid water showed no change in their health and died just as often as they normally would. So we're dealing with really, really substantial stuff here. There was up to a 400% increase in the productivity of agricultural seeds. So you just take the same seeds, you put them in the pyramid, and when you plant them, the plants get 400% bigger, 400% faster. And there was strong electrical activity at the top of each pyramid, significant earthquake reduction around the area of the pyramids. Instead of one giant quake, you get many small tremors. So this suggests, of course, earth changes are related to the consciousness field that this pyramid seems to be focusing. An enormous column of energy is detectable in the atmosphere around the pyramid, hundreds of miles wide. Severe weather is deflected away from the area around the pyramid. This is the one I love the most because this gets back to the Maharishi effect, and this is going to show you how it all interconnects. I want you to just paint this picture in your mind now. You take these big bags of salt and pepper, right? You got this gigantic pyramid. You toss these bags of salt and pepper inside the pyramid. Then you sneakily put them in to the feeding of these prisoners in selected prisons. Certain prisons get the salt and pepper from the pyramid, other prisons don't. That's the only thing you're doing, nothing else. Just pyramid charged salt and pepper. That's it. So it's in the table shakers on the table. The chefs are using it in what they're cooking, and that's the only thing that's changed. What we found was that there was a profound improvement in the attitude and behavior of these prisoners. They were rehabilitating from alcoholism. The violence in the prisons that had been really high diminished very quickly to almost no violence at all. Everybody just chilled out and relaxed. Addiction recovery, as I said. So this proves a lot of things. It proves that there is a connection between human consciousness and a consciousness from the earth that can be harnessed if we choose to. It proves that there is a connection between consciousness and earthquakes. It proves that there is a connection between consciousness and severe weather. And it proves that there is a strong likelihood, at least, that our human consciousness is directly affecting the earth. So that's really fantastic stuff. Now, I think we're going to take a little bit of a break, but I want to give you this first so you can have a little bit of time to think before we come back into this. This is just going to be 5 minutes, just enough for you to stretch, and not. I don't want you to go wandering off for 20 minutes because we don't have a whole lot of time. But I want to give you a chance to breathe. Anomalous cognition. This is basically like remote viewing ESP research. Dr. James Spottiswoode. So now we've looked at the Earth, right? We've seen that the Earth might be affecting consciousness. There's scientific proof that it's affecting consciousness. So what happens? Is there anything more that we can do beyond that? Dr. James Spottiswoode in California takes 20 years, the most elaborate collection of human anomalous cognition scientific studies ever put together. In every single one of these experiments, they're ordinary people. We're not dealing with special psychics. We're dealing with regular people tested for their ESP over a 20-year period in multiple studies. They're all documented, scientifically sound. No one had ever done this. They'd never combined the studies together before. He wanted to see if people got more psychic at a certain time of the day, maybe high noon, when the sun's right over your head. Maybe that's going to make you more psychic. Who knows? Well, what happened was that when you look at a normal synodic day, which is the Earth rotating around the sun, there was no time period where people's psychic ability increased. It basically stayed the same. There was no reaction that you could tie to like high noon or anything like that. Synodic day is the Earth rotating around the sun. But when you look at the sidereal day, which is the Earth's position relative to the center of the galaxy, he did get a reaction. How much of a reaction, before I show you, how much of a reaction do you think, some of you already know this, how much of a reaction do you think he got? Front-loaded. He cheated. This is the actual graph. Now look at this. This is fantastic. This is how psychic you are. 400% more psychic at that time that you're making this special angle relationship with the center of the galaxy, which is at 13.5 hours local sidereal time, as you can see down here. Now, I don't know what time that is in Florida, in Hawaii time right now. In California time, based on a couple weeks ago, it's around 11:30 in the morning, somewhere around there, maybe 11:45, something like that. That's around where it was. But it changes about a few minutes a day, so you have to keep looking at it, and there are websites online where you can see this. So what does this mean? Well, this is really amazing, because what this is saying is we've now seen systematically, I've shown you, evidence of a consciousness field. It starts as simply as the fact that plants can sense when other plants are being hurt. Eggs can sense when other eggs are being damaged. All the animal kingdom is interconnected. We're seeing the 100th monkey effect. We're seeing collective behavior in schools of fish. We're seeing Rene Piaget's study where chicks are able to change the behavior of a robot so that when they want the mother to come close to them, the mother does, even though the mother is just a little light on top of a random number generator. We're seeing the 9/11 studies in which worldwide activity of these random number generators amps up and shows a very strong reaction when everybody's going into fear and terror. So we see the negative side, but we also see the positive side. When enough of us generate positive emotions, positive energy, it actually has a remarkable effect on everyone's behavior, so that ordinary people like you and me have a difference in how they think. It's like just your emotional state is not your own, right? That's one of the things that this concludes you with. You might not ever have realized how much you're being affected by your environment. But now we have to go even a step further than that, because we've seen that a pyramid built on the earth can harness the earth's energy, and you can take salt and pepper, put it in the pyramid, and feed it to people, and just eating that salt and pepper is going to tremendously change their emotional state. So think about what this means for diet too. If you're eating natural foods, organic fruits and vegetables that have this energy from the earth in them automatically, it can't help but change the way that you're going to think, the way that you're going to feel, and that's why we went to the raw food farm, of course, because we wanted to get some raw food and we wanted to experience this. So now, it's not just the Earth's energy that can do the same thing as the Maharishi effect, it's the galaxy's energy. So when you come back after this short little stretching break, I'm going to talk about how the consciousness of the galaxy is activating our DNA, activating evolution, and you're going to see things. Some of you have seen this before from the last night's talk, but I also have made it such that even if you were at that talk, you're going to hear stuff you never heard before. So let's take a little bitty break, and I'll be back to you in about 6 or 7 minutes.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.